the definition that we use at Diva for Equality, you're all becoming familiar with, and that's part of this, repeating it. They say humans need it repeated at least 14 times before we integrate it into our brains, because there's so much going on. So one of them is that feminism is a true belief, right? A belief in the equality and human rights of everyone. And that's regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender expression and identity, their sex characteristics, what they're like in their bodies, skin color, ethnicity, disability, any other intersectional identity and characteristics. But more than that, as we've been learning over these 3 prior free schools, is that it's not enough to know what those identities are and to be able to say what they are. We have to be able to break those open and to look at the power and look at the privilege and oppression in the way that we move through the world and say, okay, how do we build new just systems, and how do we do it on all territories of the world, right? This is both urgent work, but it's also long-term work as well. So that's the first set of understandings. And then, as we always say, it's about changing the way you look at the world, right? So if you're changing the way you look at the world, sometimes it's going to hurt, but often it also is worth it because it gives you a whole new perspective on how you can move through the world. What we always do also is make sure that we're talking about where we are in the world. So this is not just, as we did at Commission on the Status of Women, this is not just women and gender non-binary people speaking from anywhere in the world. This is the context-specific work of women who are in the 22 island states and territories here in the Pacific. And here at DIVA, we always also add Timor-Leste, and Papua, of course, Papua Mardeke. We're also always working 60 years. West Papua and Papua have been struggling against genocide and the invasion of Indonesia and human rights violations. But also we talk about the unceded territories of countries such as Australia and Aotearoa and New Zealand. So we're always in solidarity with broader than the Pacific Island states and territories. And we always say that we recognize all of the work that's come before, that is happening now, and that will shift in the future. That's also why we do this work on base building and organizing. Because no one organization, no matter how connected or effective or old they are, can do this work without the others in the ecosystem for change. And then we always affirm that no matter what we do, it's through an action and reflection process. That's revolutionary. It means that things can sometimes seem a bit slower, but it's worth it because it means that it's affirming no matter who we are, we have a place in this work. We just start it and then we move the work wherever we are. Yeah. We say that everything we do is about pro-poor policies, is about looking at who has power and who doesn't in society. So no matter what issue, including organizing, that we have to look at those issues. Very practical things like, do I have the money to come online? Do I have the money to get to meetings, community meetings? Once I get to those meetings, is there anyone who's prepared to hear my view? Or because of the way I dress or what I look like in my gender identity, are people keeping me from saying and inputting as I need? So we always work on pro-poor sets of work. We always connect it to material change because no one wants to be spoken to or spoken at without seeing some shifts in their own lives. That's not always easy with not enough resources. All of us in civil society know that, but we're always aiming for some day-to-day change in the lives of ourselves and others. We always try and remember that not everyone lives in a capital city. Not everyone lives in a house with a roof over their head that is always dry. Not everyone can connect online as much as they would like to. And not everyone is in a center in the region. So there are some of us who are in countries that take a lot of space and power in the Pacific region and globally. But what about others who don't? And how do we make sure that we are in solidarity and social organizing with them as well? We always talk about power and control and coercion. And that's because no matter what issue we're working on, if your body is being violated or broken, or it's being controlled by another human being, then it's very, very hard for you to be able to work out what it is you want to do in social movements. We always talk about 1.5 degrees. For anyone who hasn't looked, I just say, please look at the IPCC. It's IPCC. I hope Tamani or someone can put that in the chat for us. There's just been the release of a report, and it's an incredibly important report because it talks about what we call mitigation, which is about bringing down the global greenhouse gases, making sure that global warming comes down. And the reason why that's so incredibly important is this report has basically said there is no more room for fossil fuel on this planet. We've got to get off it. And that's thousands of scientists from every region across the world. So political parties and governments are still worried when they see the scientists saying this. But for us, we say, we've known this for decades. All of you know it. It's just that you don't want to make the changes because it's about profit. It's about money. So this report is really important. Take your time to try and read it if you can, and even go online on social media and see what people are saying, because it's quite shocking, to be honest, how bad the environment is in our planet now. So I've already spoken about praxis. I just wanted to say, remember this work that we're continually doing around privilege and oppression, because that's about all of us. So when we're constructing our work on social movements, it's incredibly important for that. And being clear what we mean when we talk about the interaction of power. Yeah. And just saying, another thing that we don't talk enough about when we're talking about social organizing is bodily autonomy. It's the foundation of every set of work that we do, including activism and including advocacy. Consent is at the heart of that. And we'll talk a little bit about that, maybe more on Friday with the Management Collective and others, which is, how do you show consent? How do we demonstrate it in our lives? So that's with our intimate partners, but it's also in our family group. Are you able to show that you consent to the things that are being done for you and about you in your life? Do you have an opportunity to be part of the decision making? Is it coherent? Is there a way that it's very clear for people to know what your view is? And the third one is, are you really willing to be part of whatever it is that the community is asking you to do, or that you're asking of yourself? Are you clear that you really want to do this work? And the fourth is, consent has to be given over and over again. So that this set of work actually comes from the work on consent within sexual relationships as well. So if someone has said yes, they say yes to some sexual activity and then they change their mind, that's it. Consent has gone. So you stop the activity right there. So in the work that we do, we have to be clear on what is consent, how do we demonstrate it, and how do we move it in social organizing as much as in any set of work we do. So I hope that's all clear and helpful. And then, every time we meet, we talk about, those almost agreements that we have within the movement. We all know there's things that are a little different, that we hold from our personal knowledge, but the ones in blue, I just wanted to connect a little bit more. Every time we show the same set, but to show how it connects to different issues. So the personal is political and the political is personal. If you're involved in social organizing, then it's a deeply personal undertaking. So I'm just giving a very concrete example, and I'm sure she doesn't mind me raising, but when Gail is doing her work for sign language interpretation, she's doing it from a political, personal perspective, that she's interested in making sure that information and knowledge is being passed through to the deaf community. And any one of us who then does the same, puts these into our, our sets of work, we do that because it's political, because it's about power, because it's about power sharing. And then the next one, that's just one example. And then the next one is attributing movement knowledge. One of the reasons why we keep saying that is Always do that. Don't just suck and extract from other people's sets of work. Show where it came from. Because what you are doing then is you are also showing the movement that came before you. You're acknowledging the social organizing before you. So I think that's another reason to say, yeah, you know, we learned this from this group. And also, to be honest, it also helps other groups to do their work if you're doing that, because you're not pretending that everything just grew out of your fabulousness. Yes, it did, but it also came from the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of activists before you. And that leads to the next point in blue, which is you can't substitute the work of autonomous civil society for other groups. It is not the same as consultants. Consultants are different from autonomous organizing civil society. And we say that because that is an individual, that is not based on a group. There is no constituency to which you are accountable. If you don't understand constituency accountability, then basically you can move as much as you like in whatever direction you like. That doesn't mean that we don't want to have consultants. It means just be clear on the differences. The same with funders. Funders are not the same as autonomous, gender just women and people-led social groups. So let's be clear. There is a difference in the power relationship between funders and civil society groups, even the best funders, because there is the money relationship. Anytime you add funds into the relationship, it changes the power dynamic. So as long as we're clear and honest, then that's okay. Same as the UN, same as governments. Often when we go into relationships with governments, we say, you know, we're doing this set of work with governments. And people say, why are you doing that set of work with governments? We don't like this particular political party. But you might be in that work because you want to influence the system so that your constituency, who you are really accountable to, are not affected even worse by the current government in place. So just because you are doing a set of work with government doesn't mean that you are in collaboration the same way that you are in collaboration with another civil society group. It's a very different relationship, and what? The power imbalances are there. So we always take care with them. And the last one, I think, is that links to accountability to your constituency. How is it you are accountable to constituency? Are you posting things all the time and sharing on what work you are doing? Are you trying to be accountable within your meetings with your constituency? Do you try and do work that is in a praxis-based approach? Or do you come from outside and just say, this is what you need and we will provide it for you? Because those are very different accountability modes. And we have to be clear on how we do that in our social organizing. So I hope that was helpful, just to remind ourselves every time we will do the same and pick another. And we might have some other almost agreements that we can add to this list over time. So we also always say, you know, we look at Beijing plus 25, right? 25 years after this huge declaration, 12 areas of special interest. And if you look at Section 2, it's about educating and training of women. So does that include feminist organizing? Does that include free schools like this one? Do we think about the fact that it's incredibly important for us to share knowledge in healthy and accessible ways with each other, right? Because if we don't, then the same power is concentrated in those who do the work. And there are many, many things we've learned about how to do the set of education and training. And I'll talk a little bit later. That's a big part of today, actually, is talking about how do you do education and training and knowledge transfer in ways that feel good to everyone, but also that are effective for the movement, that are coming from the work that we've done before, and not just starting from now as if every time we're reinventing the wheel. We don't want to do that. We want to pull and draw from everything that's come before, but do it in accountable ways. So that's what we're trying to do, is say, please read this report. It's called Beijing plus 25. It was put out by SPC. This is another one that can be shared within the chat. I'm sure Tamani and others can share that in the chat. Maybe Shirley, you as well, if you're able to. So let's share all of these resources. You might not be able to get to it now. You might get to it, you know, in a few weeks, but it's a really good way to build your body of knowledge. We can't do everything in 3 hours, right? Okay, so then we move to the next one, which is around, we always build power recognition and negotiation. No matter what we do, we're negotiating all the time. You're negotiating with me right at this very minute. If you're giving me your attention, then you're negotiating with me. You're saying, okay, this is worthy of my attention, right? Because we all got plenty of things to be doing right now. And what we've tried to do at DIVA is to really find really simple, crisp, clear ways to discuss some of these ideas that we need, right? So through the course of the year, you've already done some work around intersectionality, and we keep building on that every time. You've already done some work around interlinkage analysis, getting ourselves comfortable with thinking about, remember those 4 areas of interest? You can put anything in the center and you can look at its relationship to bodies, to power and money, to institutions, and to ecological justice. So you can put anything in the center and then you can analyze it from at least 4 areas. That's what we call interlinkage analysis. You can look at bodily autonomy, and bodily autonomy is saying no matter what you do, if you don't have the ability and the right to make decisions, then it's very, very hard for you in your life to be able to move anything. Bodily integrity, which is the right for you to say to someone, stop, you have no right to do that over my body. You know, if the government all of a sudden says all women in Fiji need to do X, Y, or Z, you have a right to say, where are my human rights in that? Am I able to negotiate or am I not? And where is the tension there between public health and between the right to your own privacy and integrity, they call it, over our own bodies. And then a consent we've talked about, power analysis we've done in the first and second session. Praxis, I think you're all very familiar with now, the action and reflection cycles. We haven't really talked a lot about the golden apple. That's going to come up probably in the session after next. It's always very helpful to use that when you're doing the work around sexuality, because people have a lot of ideas about morality and ethics. So we use the concept of the golden apple a lot in that. So don't worry about that a little bit more. But basically what that's about is saying, if you approach a set of work as if that person has value, doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter if you're doing work in a prison, doesn't matter who the person is, you have to approach it that that person is part of what we call beloved community. If at any point you have withdrawn your respect for that person, then you should step away and let someone else move into that space of work, because otherwise you're not operating from a place where you can see that person as a human being that has value. Right? So that's the golden apple approach. It's very useful, especially when you're doing work with perpetrators or with many sets of work. And then what we're doing today is obviously, what is the work of social movements? I think the Women's Well we put together, and I think maybe we can get someone to share that in the chat today as well. I might put that together in the next break. But that's about kind of filling ourselves up. You know, how do you keep yourselves okay? I've just had a really tough couple of months, and to be honest, my well is running a little bit low. But that's when you have to take yourself away, have a little break, and then come back renewed. So for instance, I'm taking a few weeks off in a couple of weeks' time. It's no point in staying when your well is running dry, because then you end up not doing good work anymore. And the last couple I'd say is, you know, we keep talking about better feminist thinking, because no point acting without thinking first. One of our people we love, Audre Lorde, talks about, you know, you can't change the world by doing the same things. So we try and work out what we can do better in our praxis. And that means we have to look at bodily autonomy, intersectionality, but also inclusivity. What is it that we are doing to enable the spaces and the processes to be far more inclusive, substantively inclusive, you know, not just being the token young person who's on a panel, or the only brown face, or the only person with disability, or the only lesbian or trans person. But how do you do that in a more substantive, informed, and consistent way? Okay, and then of course, interlinkage. And then we have to keep thinking, what does movement work look like? It's so varied, right? People think, oh yeah, okay, I know what activism work is. And then you see someone doing a whole new set of work. You're like, whoa, okay, didn't even think about that that's part of social movement work. Oh, should we be doing some of that? And sometimes you should, but sometimes it's that it's someone else's work. It's not yours, right? So it also helps to know what are the broad breadth of work, do some brainstorming, and then cull it back down and say, but this is our core work. So sometimes it's about crisis response and mutual aid. Sometimes it's about service provision. Sometimes it's a referral to someone else, right? It's not our own work. Sometimes it's activism, and it might be direct activism, like we might be standing in the streets protesting outside, you know, a coal mine or something. Somebody else is protesting against a meeting that's going on. Sometimes it's about really good feminist research and analysis. We were on to, yes, so we do advocacy campaigns. Sometimes we do policy influence. So there's those of us who are in social organizing who maybe you don't see us out and about a lot. We might just be doing the underground work. So we'll talk a little bit later about what's above ground work. What's below ground work? What kind of work do you think your organization is better at? What kind of things do your staff like to do? Do they like to be out in the open doing the organizing, or they prefer to do the quiet work behind the scenes? How do we make that part of our ecosystem of activism and social organizing? Okay, so policy influence. And then what we're talking about today, which is really specific, targeted work at building our base. We know that we are never enough, right? That's already a given. We know that. But how then do we extend our base? How do we make that foundation strong in social organizing? And one of the things I would say that has been a frustration for anyone who lives in the Pacific is, how do I work with you if you're in Madang in Papua New Guinea and I'm sitting in Suva? How do you work with me if you're sitting in Taviuni and Viva is in Nandi? What are the ways that we are able to solidly keep that work going? Yes, in some ways, social organizing can be done online, but there are limits to that, right? And those limits we've got to identify, and we've got to say, are there other ways that we can still do that organizing and then connect online? And that's what we've been trying to do here at PAC-FEMCOP. And there are other examples of groups that are doing that across the region. Some better than others. So I think that's the thing, is being honest and open and saying, you know, as time goes on, how do we do it better? And then I really would say being clear with ourselves and each other, what's the difference between a civil society organization and say a campaign? Or what is the difference with a network? And what is the difference with a social movement? Because often I feel like people aren't clear. And so you go around and it's a little bit fuzzy and you're not clear how you're doing your representation, and others aren't clear on how you're doing your representation. They say, is she here speaking for that organization or that one? Did she say it when we came into this room? I'm not clear why she's here. Is she speaking on a national issue, or it's a regional set of work she's doing? Who is this person? Because often we wear what? Multiple hats. And if we're not taking care in how we represent, we can do damage to our relationships if we're not clear. Yep.